For the next about 50 minutes, as long as they let me speak, I'm going to talk about purple teaming. It's maximum 50 minutes, but we'll see where the night takes us. So a few words about me first. My name is Tuomo Makkonen. I worked at this company called Fractal, which is a cybersecurity consultancy company based here in Helsinki, Finland. I do mostly purple teaming. I have been doing this for about 4 years now, for almost 5 years. And before that, I've been doing all kinds of cybersecurity consulting stuff for about 10 years. And before that, I did software development and software architecture for a bit under 10 years. And if you want to talk to me about this or some other thing after this, feel free to approach me. I'm easy to approach. I'll be in the corner while you're partying, studying the blade. And yes, this is actually a big picture of me. Huge picture. All right, but what we're going to talk about in the next 48 minutes is going to be purple teaming, so overview of what it means to us, to our company, and how we approach it. And I have a couple of case studies, how we approach purple teaming in different kinds of scenarios and setups and environments. And then some strategies, how to approach purple teaming, how to get started, that sort of thing. And then after that, a few words about the future of purple teaming and security work in general, how I see it. It might not come to pass, but we'll see. And hopefully have some time for questions and some answers after that. So, purple teaming, Webster's definition. It's a security assessment or security work approach that the aim is to maximize the value created for the participants by coordinating and coupling the activities done both on the red, meaning the attacking side, and blue, meaning the defensive side. So via collaboration and working together, we try to make as big an impact in the clients or the organization security readiness and security posture and security maturity as possible. And of course, the name comes from the combined effort of the blue and the red team, which is purple according to laws of the physics. And here's a table. I have one table per each presentation, and here we try to just put the purple teaming in the map and compare it with different kinds of other security assessment and security work that you might be more familiar with. So starting from pen testing, penetration testing, which basically you define a narrow scope with the client, and then you assess that for a few days, a couple of weeks, and then typically the idea is to cover as much terrain as possible, so test as many things as possible, and then you deliver a report and you're done. And typically the client doesn't know too much about the method or what was tested and what was the results of the successful tests and so on, or unsuccessful. And red teaming is the same thing, except a bit wider scope, longer time frame, and also the idea is there to more focus on objectives. So the red team wants to utilize the methods that actual adversaries, meaning attackers, use when they try to attack different kinds of organizations, and then they just basically want to find the shortest possible path from the beginning to the end, and then they report on the shortest possible path, and you do not necessarily have any other kind of visibility on what are the other paths except this path that they walked during the test. But in this, the way that we approach purple teaming, we play by open book, so we tell as much as possible about the tests that we're going to do, the adversaries that we're going to emulate, and the test cases and so on. And then we have typically monthly iterations where we run the tests, and then we go through the results together with the client, and we think about the ways of fixing the issues or the test cases or the attacks that were successful from the attacker's point of view. And then we come together with ideas on how to mitigate them, and then during the next iteration we can verify the fixes and also do a bunch of other stuff that was not done before. So it's just collaboration and iteration are the two words that you need to remember. So what are the benefits? So like I said, it's a collaborative approach, so collaboration over confrontation. So if you think about your typical enterprise nowadays, so the technology stack is huge and it's getting thicker by the day. So there's lots of moving parts and functionality and so on. So you need to work together with the different stakeholders in order to make the maximum impact for the security work. So if you want to have the maximum bang for buck or positive security outcomes, there needs to be some kind of shift from this adversarial, which is maybe the more normal approach of security, especially security consulting, to this like collaboration where you work together. And then the results of purple teaming enables the company to make evidence and database decisions and prioritizations, how to use the limited resources that every company has in the end in the most efficient manner. And then the whole idea of the thing is to improve the security posture, and we do it by iteration. So the threat surface changes, attacks change, attacks get better, environment gets better and different. So it's not like a static, no one organization and no attack surface is static. It's changing all the time, and you need to evaluate the attack surface and the possible attacks all the time in order to make as secure an environment as possible. And this is not, I didn't came up with this stuff actually. There's lots of work that has been done before, all kinds of frameworks, starting from, I think the Lockheed Martin paper, Cyber Kill Chain, cool name, started at it was released in 2011. I think it was the first one that had this like structured way of thinking about attacks in terms of this life cycle. So you break the typical attack down to different phases, and then you think about what the attacker does in that phase and what the defender does in that phase, and then you try to use that structured approach to secure your organization in your environment. And you see that it's 2011 because it says that installation deny mechanism is chroot jail. So. And then the second landmark was MITRE attack framework. MITRE is this a research corporation from the States, and they released this, I don't remember, I don't even try to guess what the term, the letters stand for, but it's basically like a database of attacker TTP, so techniques, tactics, and procedures. So ways that the real-world attackers have done or implemented in their attacks against real-world environments. So it's a database of attacks and attack mechanisms that have been structured based on this lifecycle philosophy also. So this is one of the main data sources for defenders and attackers nowadays. And then there's Tiber, which is financial sectors, this like a red teaming approach, which is also heavily impacted by purple teaming philosophy or approach. And then there's this research paper called the Unified Kill Chain, which is like another way of trying to structure the same thing, and it's also used heavily by the Tiber.eu purple teaming best practices paper that came out in 2022. So there's lots of data and lots of white papers and PDFs to shift through. And okay, so clearing the air. So some of the like typical misconceptions about purple teaming. So of course, it's not a solution for all security problems in an organization, but it needs to be a part of broader security strategy for it to make sense. And it's not just for large corporations or enterprises. Each company of each size can use the approach, from small businesses that just want to find their security baseline and want to figure out where they can start to improve and raise the bar to like big mega corporations that have really mature security operations, and they just want to identify if there's anything that they could be doing better. And also it's not really dependent to technology or what kind of, are you cloud native or strictly on-prem 90s style. Everything, you can conduct purple teaming in any kind of environment. And of course, it's not a replacement for other types of security work, so there's still place for assessments and audits and red teaming and penetration testing and so on, but it's just a different kind of approach. And the last thing is that there is no tool, no automated tool or no technology that solves this problem or does this automatically. So actually, turns like with most work, you actually need work human on human if you want to solve the problems. All problems are basically human problems in the end. And here's just some motivation to get us started. So this is what a typical organization who hasn't tested their capabilities look like. So you basically don't know what you can or cannot detect. So this is the MITRE attack framework, and there's all kinds of attacks or ways of attacking an organization described in different phases of the life cycle. And if you haven't tested any of them, you actually do not know what is your capability. So you might have some vendors and the technology and stuff that say that, hey, we can detect this, but if you haven't tested it, then it's actually not true necessarily. It might be. And then you do 1 or 2 iterations of purple teaming, and then you start to see what the situation actually looks like. So you can see that, hey, I'm not actually too good at this detection and response stuff, but I know where I need to, what I need to do or where I need to focus on in order to make things better. And then you can start to make like evidence and database decisions or where to spend your money and time and resources and what you need to focus on. And then after some other iterations, a few more iterations, then things start to look more green and you're a bit more happier and you can show your bosses and the money man that the spent dollars actually make some difference in the security posture, and you can say that, hey, I was here and now I'm here. And that's a good thing. So that's it about the purple teaming. And then I have a couple of these scenarios that I promised to go through. So we still have some time, so let's see. So the first one is dealing with EDR. So as like a motivation, entry vectors, meaning ways of attackers attacking organizations are still the big 3. So there's phishing, and the idea there is to get some kind of payload executed on the target's endpoint, and then the payload calls home to the command and control infrastructure, and then the attacker can operate via that connection in the environment and try to get to achieve the objectives. It's getting tougher and tougher nowadays because these EDR tools that we're going to talk about are better, and hardening and the baselines on the technology level are better, but still it's the number 1. And then there's brute forcing, which basically means that you have some kind of server that is sitting in your network and it has exposed interface to the internet, and there's some kind of login functionality. For example, like some kind of legacy VPN server that somebody forgot to turn off, and it only has one-factor authentication. So if somebody can guess the password, they are sitting in the middle of your network, or some RDP or VNC or SSH or Telnet, many kinds of protocols. I could go on for days. And exploitation, which means that instead of guessing password, it just basically means that finding exploits or vulnerabilities in the same servers and try to gain access using those vulnerabilities. So these are the ways. But now we're going to focus on number 1, which is phishing. And like I said, attacks against users and endpoints are still the top attack vector for your typical large-scale breach, like some kind of ransomware or other breach. And it follows from that you are a huge enterprise. You have 10,000 employees, you have 10,000 laptops, and then you have 10,000 ways of accessing your organization. So that's the largest attack surface that you have. And we are all familiar with the antivirus products, and they were introduced in the beginning of times to counter these kinds of threats, but it turns out that they are not sufficient to counter all of the ways and means that the attackers have at their disposal to perform these attacks. So then somebody came up with an idea. Let's improve the technology, and it's an endpoint and detection response. And it's basically an agent that is running on laptops and servers and the environment, and then there's some kind of backend that is collecting data that the agent is collecting from the environment. And the agent collects all kinds of telemetry from the system, created processes, file manipulation, all activity that the user does on the endpoint, what's happening on the network level and the registry level and so on. So basically, most of the things that you do on an endpoint that is protected by EDR is collected in one way or another. And there's lots of ways and technologies that the EDRs implement to be able to do that. There's kernel drivers. They hook the DLLs that are loaded on the processes so that they can inspect the calls that the processes are doing. They have network filters. Static scanner is still a thing, so they are scanning the files, and then they are intercepting calls to the file system using mini-filter drivers and all kinds of other technologies. And here's proof. So I just took a few screenshots showing that you can find these things all over the place if you know where to look. So this is from an endpoint that is protected by Palo Alto Cortex. So you can see that the top picture shows that it has loaded a few drivers that are doing some protecting. And then there's a picture of a CMD to TXT process running on the endpoint, and there's at least three Cortex XDR protection DLLs in that attached to that process when it started. And then there's also the file system filter driver in this other picture, and also gatekeeping by F-Secure going on this endpoint. So they are there and they're running. And just some word on terminology. So EDR is the technology, and then there's MDR, which is the technology plus a guy who's monitoring the technology for the system for alerts, what's happening on the endpoint. And then there's XDR, which is a guy, the technology. It's not necessarily even the guy, just the technology, which is better than the EDR. So there's all kinds of things like vulnerability management, health checking, threat hunting, incident response capability, possibility to pull artifacts from the endpoints, and lots of stuff. And if you're more interested in this stuff, then here's a resource for you. So MITRE ATT&CK also had these attack evaluations, which is not a competition, except if you ask all of these companies, then it is a competition. So they just take a bunch of these products, and then they run tests, like attack scenarios using these products, and then they publish the results, and all of the companies win. But yeah, so these are all of the companies that are in this space. So, and here's a picture from the cockpit of one of these tools. So I think this was CrowdStrike. It says here on the top corner, Falcon, CrowdStrike Falcon. So there's just to show that there's lots of, it's not just a big alert flashing there, somebody's hacking us, but there's lots of stuff going on there, and lots of like information that you need to understand and put into context and digest in order for you to make informed decisions about the situation, what's happening on the endpoint. And that, like I said, these tools collect data, but it's up to you if you are responsible for protecting an environment to use that data for your advantage to detect the attackers. So it's not enough to just see that, hey, alerts are popping up. You need to actually be able to understand the context of the alerts, and then you need to think about, is that normal for us or is that unnormal, and how to respond to that specific alert. So you can broadly think about like brittle detection rules and robust detection rules. So brittle detection rule means like a file hash, IP address, something like that. So that's useful in some contexts. You want to have alert if there's a Mimikatz file hash on your endpoint, but that's not necessarily enough. Then you have robust detection rules that detect behaviors or like patterns. So this guy ran that thing, and then he ran that thing, and then they logged into there. That's like a behavior that you also might want to detect. But the best result comes when you combine these two things and try to make the detection capability as robust or strong as possible. And here I just put an example that you need to think about. So if you're running Slack in your environment and somebody starts Slack at 3 a.m. in the morning, that might be normal. And then Slack loads an unsigned DLL, which is called this DLL. That might be normal if Slack does that normally. But if it's not a normal pattern for Slack, then it might be something that you want to investigate further. Then Slack makes a connection to the internet over TCP port 443. That's normal, I bet. But then Slack tries to read register values about security settings on the endpoint, and then it tries to open a handle to the LSAS process, which is storing the Yeah, so that's not something that Slack does. So this is at least something that you need to start investigating, but all of this needs to still be put into context. So why are we doing this thing in a purple teaming way? So our goal as purple team is to identify the most significant gaps in our clients' EDR capabilities or the detection capability. And then think about mitigations for addressing them. So there might be many reasons for some attack being successful in the environment. It's not just that the tool is bad. There might be configuration things or all kinds of, or the alert might be not interesting to the guy who was watching it, or many different reasons. So we want to help the client or help the organization produce mitigations for putting the alert into context and address them, and then verify the effectiveness of those mitigations by running the same test again and seeing that now the detection response works. And the blue team wants to block stuff, and if they cannot block malicious stuff, then they want to generate actionable alerts. And then they want to collect enough telemetry to perform investigations and also have enough information to build custom detection logic and custom detection rules based on those collected telemetry. So if you're not collecting this last line, if you don't have visibility on this event, then you're in the blind. Something bad might happen, but you don't know it. And of course, you don't want to collect anything, and you want to minimize false positives and avoid alert fatigue, so that there's not like a deluge of alerts every day in front of the guy who was supposed to be analyzing them. And in the end, just find the meaningful signals from that massive amount of data. So now we have a few evasion methods that we can go through that we are using. And number one is bring your own vulnerable device. So this basically this means that when you attack an endpoint, you can bring with you a vulnerable device driver, and use that vulnerability in that device driver to do bad things on that endpoint. Typically, the best thing is to kill the EDR processes altogether so that it's blinded on that endpoint. But if that cannot be done, you can at least try to do all kinds of other ways of hampering the functionality and the capabilities of that EDR that's running there. And this has been going on for a while, and it has been picking up in popularity by ransomware groups and so on. And the prevention and detection methods are still developing, so there's lots of work that is being done by Microsoft and the EDR vendors to address this problem better, but still there's some gaps. So this is one of the easiest or best ways of getting rid of the EDR altogether. But of course, this comes with a few drawbacks. Either you need to have that driver already on that endpoint, or then you need to be a local admin or somehow be able to gain local admin on that endpoint in order for you to load that driver. And then you need to have the code ready for you to utilize that driver. And I bet that if this produces an alert on the back end, then it's typically a critical alert, so you don't have a lot of time. And there are many ways of fiddling with the drivers. So some EDRs, for example, and Windows, at least with some drivers, it only detects the hashes of the driver. So if the file hash matches a certain vulnerable driver, it's denied. But turns out you can fiddle with the hash of the signed driver by putting stuff in a certain block of the signature on the file, so that without breaking the signature. So you can change the hash and not break the signature, and thereby maybe be able to bypass the EDR and load the driver. So, and here's just a picture of one of such, just to prove it's possible. Here's a picture of one of our tools that is using a well-known vulnerable driver to kill defender processes on the endpoint. So it's running in a tight loop. The service manager is continuously trying to start the processes, but whenever it pops up, the killer.exe kills the process. So it's basically blinded on the endpoint. So there's no telemetry being gathered from this endpoint, and you can do whatever you want. And the other way is disable the telemetry to the backend. So if you cannot get rid of the EDR altogether, you want to do all kinds of other stuff in order to disrupt the data going back to the backend for analysis. So of course, there's many ways of doing this. For example, trying to do adversary in the middle attacks on the traffic itself, or modify the host file on the endpoint, or do DNS cache poisoning in order to make the traffic go to a sinkhole that you control, or some other place that is not the backend of the EDR server, or change firewall rules, or tamper with the route entries. And some EDR solutions try to do something about this, and some just say that, okay, this is possible, we don't care. And you could even, sometimes you can even find the install password of the EDR itself and just use the legitimate tools to install it or stop the services from the endpoint, so that's also good. And then if none of these things work, then you try to operate in the gaps of the detection capability of the tool. So you can use custom tools that are not detected by the EDRs, or you can try to use these well-documented or well-known EDR blind spots to operate in the gaps. Or you can use this living off the land methodology, which basically means using the tools on your endpoint that are pre-installed to conduct the attacks. And they are pretty heavily fingerprinted now, but the good side of these fingerprints is that it's not typically a high-level alert if somebody runs like who am I, or iterates, for example, or lists the domain admins in the environment, so you can still get by, even though I bet there's lots of telemetry being gathered by your shenanigans. And then you can utilize the C2 capabilities of your C2 framework. Many of the commercial frameworks have robust ways of trying to run your code and commands and the attack so that it doesn't get picked up, at least immediately, by the EDR running on the endpoint. Or you can just use the endpoint as SOX proxy, meaning that you just pipe the traffic through that endpoint, thereby bypassing the capabilities of the EDR almost completely. Or you can cheat, which means that you can just rip the certificate from the endpoint and install it in the Kali VM and hack the environment, or connect to the VM and connect to the VPN using the unmanaged endpoint, and then use that to conduct the attacks. And that's also one way of course, bypassing the capability. Or you can, if you have the physical access to the computer, you can just disable BitLocker, move the binary away, enable BitLocker, and then when you reboot the computer, there's no EDR anymore. So why would you do this? Does this make any sense? But the idea is just to see what is the capability of the organization to detect the attacks if they are if the capability of the EDR tool is limited or bypassed completely. So in an ideal world, you are not just trusting on one single source of information to detect attacks. So hopefully if somebody connects to your network using a rogue device with valid certificate, you could be able to see that and at least think that, hey, this is pretty suspicious. And when that guy starts to query your AD, you might think that this is more suspicious. So you need to have many layers of detection on many ways of collecting information and doing the necessary reasoning about the ongoing attacks. And of course, the capabilities of these tools and the capabilities of published attacks against these tools are continuously evolving and developing, and there are new attacks and new capabilities. So in order for you to understand the capabilities of your tool, you need to continuously re-evaluate and iterate, so that you know that what your capability actually is. So that's it, EDR. And now we have another thing, second case study, which is operating in an on-prem AD domain environment. What's an AD? This is the most recent picture that I could find. And if you don't know what AD is, you can just basically, you don't need to care about the next 5 to 10 minutes at all. But AD is basically a Microsoft service that manages permissions to access resources in a closed network. So there's like resources, meaning services, computers, and there's groups and users and or other kinds of settings that you can define in the AD. And the key functions are authentication, so it checks that are you who you are, so it verifies credentials and enforces security policies based on those credentials. And also nowadays, there's also a big exposure to the internet via SSO, so you might have like AD federated services, which means that you have a interface towards the network that you can hook your other applications against, and you can use your on-prem source of truth to check for authentication. And also authorization, so based on your groups and other parameters, the AD or the domain controller decides what you can connect to and what not. So of course this is a prime target for attackers, and it has been well studied, and all of the attacks, most of the attacks against AD environments are well understood and well documented, and there are good tools and so on out there. So what are the typical things that we see in our purple teaming assignments? I would say that currently the biggest thing is AD certificate services, which is each domain has a certificate server which is responsible for publishing these things called certificate templates, and each thing that connects to that domain can ask for certificates based on these templates. And if these templates are not well written or defined, then a guy who has joined, just a regular guy minding his business, joining the domain, and he can ask for a certificate for a guy in the domain admins group, and then the domain controller accepts that certificate as a authentication material, so you can just crank out the domain admin credentials on demand using that vulnerability. So that's pretty handy. And the other thing is SCCM, which is System Center Configuration Manager. So that's basically another typical component of enterprise AD environment, and that's a way of publishing applications and stuff like that in the environment, and installing central way of installing and managing applications on endpoints. So there's also a bunch of things that could go wrong with this setup, starting from this legacy way of authentication, which means that there might be these network access account credentials, which are domain credentials that are sitting in basically in clear text in all of the endpoints in the environment. And if they are in any way if they have in any way too much privileges, then you can use those, read those clear text credentials and use those to attack the domain. Or there might be lots of stuff in the content library itself. So if there's some legacy applications published that way, it might have credentials or certificates or connection strings or API keys or network paths or all kinds of interesting stuff that you can use to conduct your attacks. And then there's Kerberoasting, which is a way of pulling the password hashes of service accounts from the domain controller. And you can then take those hashes to your GPU environment and try to crack them. And if you hit on a weak password, as you typically do, then you can use that service account to attack the environment. And typically, oftentimes, these service accounts also have excessive privileges. For example, they are at least in a local admin group in some server that you can then log into and try to do some nasty stuff there. And then there's this broad category of weird setups, which is something that happens. So there might be like a domain admin service account that is logging on to all endpoints in the environment, like every week to do some vulnerability scanning or collecting information on the endpoint or something like that. So then you just need to wait that the service account logs in, and then you can grab its credentials and fire away. Or there might be some, for example, a hypothetical backup agent running as domain admin on the endpoint, and then you can just grab that process's token and then appear to be that process when you're approaching the domain and add yourself to the domain admins group or do whatever you want. So that's typically what happens, oftentimes what we see. And of course, there's bad passwords. There's too many privileges for users, so you might not be in a domain admins group, but you might be in all Linux servers admins group, and that's almost as bad. And then there's NTML hashes, which is the hashing format that the AD environment uses, and that's basically the same as password, so you don't even need to get the password. You can get the NTML hashes from somewhere, and those are basically everywhere, and then you can use that NTML hash to log into places. And credentials are everywhere, like above, and then there are places like sysvol, which is a file share, or the DC, it might have secrets. There are file shares everywhere, which might have secrets or credentials, and everybody has passwords to TXT, and the IT admin guys have updated PS1, which has the domain admin password. So it follows from this that it's pretty difficult to run an on-prem domain in a secure manner. And this is just a picture of a tool that we love called Bloodhound, which is mapping the relationships between different kinds of things in the domain and building attack paths based on graph theory. So it's just to show that nobody can keep this in their head, and if something happens to this guy or this guy, it might have some unintended consequences in this whole graph that you don't know about unless you test this stuff. And then we have this mind map from just to show you how many ways of attacking a domain there is. This is a Orange Cyber Defense AD attack mind map, which is documenting all kinds of publicly known ways of attacking AD environment. Are you ready? Boom. Yes, you saw it. So there's two reasons. Just to show that there's lots of stuff, and I wanted to include that thing in this presentation. And again, yes, we're not done yet. Yes. Okay, so if you're running a domain, all of this is something that you need to be worried about. So one of the reasons that I'm on this side of the equation. And here is just the credit, so you can use your favorite search engine to find that with that keyword. No. This is Windows 11, man. So why are we doing this? So the idea is to, like I said in this, showed in that Bloodhound picture, the idea is to identify the attack paths, mapping the terrain, prioritizing the targets in the environment, and find the weaknesses that we can leverage to gain access to those targets. And then execute that path. So make a plan, run the plan, and hopefully get caught. So it's a win for everybody. And then there's the end game, so get domain admin or equivalent, do the nasty deed and maintain access in the environment. And the blue teams wants to, of course, detect as early as possible with proactive monitoring and fine-tuning the alerts based on the activities, and verify the telemetry they are collecting and ensure that it's sufficient and the fidelity is good enough that you can make decisions based on that data, and also that it's correct, that the usernames and IP address and all of the other indicators of compromise in those alerts are actually correct and not like 5 weeks old. And then the end goal is to validate the response capability. So not just detect, but also analyze the information, contain the target, eradicate the attacker, and do the whole NIST. I don't remember the rest of those, but there are a bunch more steps in that line dance. Yeah, but why would you do this? So like I said, AD is a huge beast and it's continually shifting its shape. So it's good to run pen tests or red teams every second year according to Cyber EU, but then it would be better if you evaluate the attack paths more often so that you know where your weaknesses are. And it's actually pretty easy to make the attacker's life pretty hard in a domain if you know what to monitor and what the catastrophic attack paths are and what they look like. And thereby you can relatively easy, maximize the probability of detection in your environment. And then I drew this nice, I had time, so I drew this picture. So the idea here is to just highlight that the red team, like I said earlier, is trying to just find the shortest, typically the path of least resistance from the starting position to the end goal of the attack, which is achieve objectives here. And when we are doing purple teaming, we try to find as many paths as possible and prioritize the paths and then execute the paths and then see where the weaknesses are. So the dotted line is supposed to mean in this picture that not everything works, but at least we tried. So I came up with the names for these categories. So of course this is like a red team is doing Dijkstra's algorithm if you're a graph theory nerd. And purple team is doing a traveling salesman, except in traveling salesman you need to end up in the same place that you started. So I'm calling this the drunk traveling salesman. And here's one of my pet peeves, I couldn't resist putting this in. So typically there's this true operator fallacy in the internet that true red team operator never does anything that gets you caught. So I compare it to the no true Scotsman fallacy. So actually, if you think about it, what value does it bring if you execute a red teaming assignment and the report says that, yeah, we did this stuff and we didn't get caught. And we also pride ourselves in the fact that we do the stupid things, typically first, and then we try something else if that doesn't work. So this is just like a breakdown of a couple of those phases in the graph. So for example, just to highlight that we try to do many things and see what works and what not. And we find, and our clients find, that this actually produces value. Then you know, does the stupid stuff work and does the non-stupid stuff work? And now just another interactive element. Here's a list of detections from Defender. So there's actually pretty many attacks that the Defender environment knows about. So all of this is something that you also need to think about in your environment. All right, so those were the case studies. And then we have some strategies. So the purple teaming approach to everything is identify the most significant risks facing your environment, then evaluate them with, of course, technical testing, then review the findings and prioritize the activities based on the findings, and do it in a collaborative fashion, then mitigate the issues, and then you can verify the effectiveness doing the tests again. And of course, you want to do the periodical testing not only to detect the regressions, but also to introduce new test cases in your scenarios. And what are the test cases? So here's just a couple of examples. So TTPs, again, the techniques, attacker techniques that are being observed in the wild. So for example, the scalper roasting attack that I talked about, you can do it with many approaches, and each of these approaches exercise different aspects of your detection capability. So it might be over the network, it might be using PowerShell, it might be using a binary, it might be using a binary that is at least somewhat obfuscated. So I argue that you need to detect most of these things in order for you to say that, hey, I have a good resilient detection capabilities. And the same for the template enumeration that we talked about earlier. And then you put these things together into scenarios which are basically end-to-end attacks comprised of multiple TTPs as earlier. And it is apparent that there are so many ways of attacking and so many TTPs and so many ways of emulating or testing each TTP that there's a huge number of scenarios that you can put together in individual domain. And here I just exploded the MITRE attack framework just to show that there are so many ways of attacking the environment that you can, if you think about ways of walking through that thing, you are not going to run out of work anytime soon. And of course, you need to have LLM and AI in all of the talks nowadays. So here's just a simple tool that we put together, which is reading all of the attacker data from MITRE, and then just based on the prompt, it's generating test cases or testing scenarios that emulate the mechanism or the behavior of certain attack groups, attacker APT groups, APT 29 in this case. It doesn't make any sense, but hey. So how do you get started? So first you need to identify objectives, so what you want to achieve with purple teaming. Is it like enhancing your detection capabilities, response times, or just understanding which TTPs work in your environment, what not? And then you define the scope, and typically it's easy to start with a limited scope and then expand once you get familiar with the process. Then you need to put together a team which has stakeholders from all relevant parties in the environment, so typically at least like the blue team or the security team, but there might be like IT people, service owners, and so on, depending on what the scope is. And the best results typically come from utilizing the existing resources and the tools and technologies in the environment, and it's not the best move to throw more money at the problem immediately before you understand what you actually need to do better. So use what you have as well as possible. That will get the most out of your existing capability. And then you learn what you did in the earlier phases and then iterate and do better all the time. And you must have executive support, meaning that you need to be able to put the necessary resources into this thing in order to make it work. You must have clear objectives and open communication between all parties. Otherwise, it also doesn't work if one of the teams is keeping secrets. It's not a good way forward. And good documentation, good reports, and regular debriefs of what happened and what worked and what not. And a mentality of continuous learning for all parties, not only the blue team, but also the red team and all the other participants of the exercise. And some things that typically go wrong is that focus too much on the attack framework and try to make everything green in that framework and not think about other ways, because the attackers are not actually committed into following the attack framework in their attacks. They come up with new stuff, and you need to also take that into account. And then there might be situations that there's no follow-through, nobody's responsibility, nobody is taking the lead on fixing the things, which means that we just do the same things all over and over again, and that doesn't make much for a secure environment. And then there's carte non blanche situation, which means that you don't get, there's artificial limitations on the scope, and you cannot do like something, or you cannot touch some server or environment or something like that, and that's also not something that limits the attackers. And the final thing is that oftentimes it might be that the blue team wants to catch the attacker and the red team wants to not be caught and wants to get the objectives, and that's also not a collaborative method. All right, 2 minutes for the future, let's go. What happens in the future, the way I see it, and this is I bet this is the way it's going to go based on my earlier predictions. So everything will go to the cloud, and most of the things that can go to the cloud will go to the cloud, and that means that the purple teaming approach also needs to take this into account. So it will need to be fully integrated with the cloud environments, especially nowadays with the multi-cloud and hybrid ecosystems. And also the things that are not in the cloud will be more interesting, because apparently there's some reason not to put them in the cloud, and that typically is a security reason, and that's interesting for attackers also. And everything will have an API, and that means that there will be increased focus on like inter-service and inter-environment and inter-vendor communications, and I bet that there will be lots of vulnerabilities there. And cloud-native software development means that purple teams and blue teams need to understand the serverless architectures, containers, Kubernetes, microservices, continuous security testing integrated. It needs to be integrated in the CI/CD pipelines so that you can get full visibility on what happens in the build pipelines and what attacks might be or what vulnerability might be lurking there. And there will be more automation, of course, because everything has an API and everything's in the cloud. It follows from that many things the things that can be automated should be automated in the future. And following from all of these things, the speed of attacks will increase because everything has an API. So you can iterate and conduct attacks automatically faster, and that also means that your response capability needs to be faster. There's no weekends to think about the thing anymore. And yes, there are just, apparently there can be all kinds of attacks also in the cloud. So I have another movie here. Let's watch the movie. So this is from Guard Duty Alerts, AWS Prime or Premier security tool. So it also can detect a bunch of nasty stuff in the environment. So we are not fully secure in the cloud either. Hey, RDP brute forcing, what do you know? And then entry vectors in 2030. Supply chains and integrations, like I said, they will be a big deal because their software components are so interconnected and depending on each other. So all of the interconnections between different systems are, of course, interesting for attackers. So the focus will be there. And there will be exploitation in the future and phishing, especially for tokens, bypassing two-factor authentication if you can gain access to good tokens that can be used to access cloud resources. And if you're studying brute forcing, I would change the major at this point. I don't think that that's a big thing in 2030. Call me crazy. Okay, so purple teaming tenants, stay grounded. You need to have realistic objectives of what you can and cannot achieve with this approach. And the goals need to be based on clear factual information instead of pipe dreams. And of course, it doesn't do well to avoid to hype the capabilities of this approach too much. So it's just a way of iterating, identifying vulnerabilities, fixing vulnerabilities and issues, and also learning stuff together at the same time. So, and you need to be able to adapt to change. So technology changes, attacks change, and if you cannot incorporate these into your defense philosophy or purple teaming philosophy, then you are stuck in the past, and that's not a good place to be stuck in. And like I said, learn from the past. Don't get stuck in the past, but learn from the past. Not the other way around. That doesn't make any sense. And with the innovative approach and collaborative approach, you can typically find innovative solutions to problems, and those are typically good. So that might mean like new tools, techniques, defense strategies, detection use cases, or other kind of, or maybe even like ways of talking with each other in your environment, in your enterprise, in order to identify and fix issues. That's it. Thank you very much.